Welcome back, friends. Last weekend was a little slow in the tournament department with the holiday weekend going on, but we still have some tournaments to go through. So sit back, relax, and let's get right to it. Just a quick reminder before we get started, do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you liked the video, don't forget the like button. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe. It helps support me, support the channel, and make sure you get all my latest videos. If you're looking for any ways to offer any additional support, I have created a Patreon. The link is in the description below. Feel free to check it out. Thanks, guys. Let's get to it. First up is the player numbers for the previous week. And as I mentioned, it was a slow week. So last week we had 419 players. And for the data slate, we're sitting at just over 4,200. Games played last week was just over 2,200. And the data slate is just over 21,200. And we only had 7 tournaments recorded last week for a data slate total of 71. All right, the first thing we're going to look at is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. Just a quick reminder that Games Workshop's acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%. So anything you see within that range will be in green, anything slightly above or below will be in yellow, and anything way above or below will be in red. All right, so last week, Grey Knights actually came out on top with a 60% win rate, and number 2 is Thousand Sons with 59, Deathwatch 58, World Eaters 56, and Tyranids at 56 as well. Down the bottom, we had Imperial Agents at 17, Chaos Knights at 41, Ash Militarum and Sisters of Battle at 44, and a 3-way tie with Space Marines, Death Guard, and Chaos Space Marines all at 45. So Thousand Sons, they followed up last week with another good week of results. So they had 59% win rate this week, and I think a 58% last week. So starting to turn around a little bit for them the last couple weeks. Drukhari had a really good bounce back week at 52%. Last week they were down in the 30s, so it's nice to see them get a little bump back. And at the bottom there, Chaos Knights, they've been pretty consistent between like 46 to 50%. And this week they suffered a little bit, down at 41%, so they took a bit of a hit. Some other things to note, Necrons had a bit of a down week, only 46%. So Blood Angels down at 46%. Aeldari also at 46%. They took a bit of a hit this week. We've seen some newer armies at the top, and I think a lot of that has to do with the limited number of tournaments and players we had. So 1 or 2 people doing well with an army can really boost the numbers overall. So you have Lees of Votan at 52%, World Eaters at 56, Grey Knights up there at 60, and then you even have, like I said, Drukharis up there, Imperial Knights, Black Templars all over 50, even AdMax at 50%, and they've been struggling for a while. I mean, overall, this week's a little bit more skewed numbers-wise than normal, because you got a lot more people at the top, over 55%, due to the low player volume. So that's going to spike the results a little bit if a couple people do really good with an army, or a couple people do really bad, like Imperial Agents with 17% win rate. So it was fairly balanced overall. Few armies doing really, really well, and a few armies doing really, really bad. But it's nice to see, with limited players, that some armies that you don't normally see at the top of the list get to make it up there. So next thing we're going to look at is army representation. So this is a percentage of the player base playing each army. And if everyone played every army equally, everyone would be at about 3.7, 3.8%. So you can take a look at the chart here to see how many people are playing each army. So at the top, we have Aeldari with 8.4%. Then we have Custodes at 6.9, Demons at 6.7, Guard at 6, and Space Marines at 5.7. Down at the bottom, we have AdMech at 0.2, Agents at 0.2, Black Templars at 1, Thousand Sons at 1, and Gene Stealer at 1.7. So Aeldari takes over the top spot from Custodes, who have been there the whole data slate. Demons remain near the top of the list. They've been there since Christmas, whether it's from Legion of Excess, Shadow Legion. They've just, despite the fact that they're not getting a Codex this edition, they've been getting a lot of detachments, and people are having a lot of fun playing. They've been pretty competitive, so hopefully Games Workshop can see that and maybe think about keeping them around as a Demons player. That's kind of what I'm hoping for. AdMech and Imperial Agents, they have 0.2% rep, so they only had 1 player last week, so the AdMech player went 50% win rate, and the Imperial Agents only won 1 game out of 6, so they had a 17% win rate. But with limited amounts of players, you're actually seeing a much closer spread than normal. There's a lot more green than there has been in the last couple weeks, and the yellows are not nearly as far away from the average. Normally you see a lot more armies down near the 1 to 2%. So it's kind of odd that with the limited players that it is a little bit closer together. I thought it would be a little bit more skewed into the really popular armies, but I guess everyone who did show up decided to bring a nice mix of everything. So that was good to see. All right, next up, we're going to look at the chart that combines all 3 stats of win rate, XOX1 percentage, and representation. So XOX1 percentage, just a reminder, is the percentage of people playing each army who only lost 1 game or didn't lose any games at a tournament. Doesn't necessarily mean they won the tournament, but they played at the top tables. They went 4-1 or 5-0, and it's just a good representation of people who had success with the army. The higher percentage, the more people did well with the army. So you can kind of get an idea of how each army is performing. And by combining all the stats, you can just see which armies are performing overall across all categories. Thousand Sons, even though they had a really low representation of 1%, they had such a high XOX1 and such a high win percentage that they're at the top of the list. So they only had 1% of 400 is 4 people. So So those 4 people did really well, even though there wasn't many of them. They all had a lot of success as tournaments. Didn't translate to any wins, but they did do really well. Black Templars, 50% win rate, 50% XOX1, 1% rep. So again, the 2 people who did good with Black Templars did really good. The people who didn't did really bad. Grey Knights came in at 60% with a 33% XOX1 and a 2% rep. So a little bit higher representation there. Really good XOX1. The average is usually around 17 or 18 and a really good win rate. Tyranids in 4th and then World Eaters in 5th. And both Tyranids and World Eaters are pretty much the same as each other, except Tyranids wins out because they have a higher representation. Down at the bottom, you have Agents, Sisters, then Genestealer Cults, Admech, and Chaos Knights rounding out the bottom 5. So Genestealer Cults, Sisters, and Admech had pretty rough weeks with a 0% XOX1. So anyone who brought these armies to a tournament never really got to the end tables. So it was kind of a rough week across the board there. And the representation for Sisters was 2.6. It's the highest it's been in a little bit. So there definitely was more players than normal playing them, but they just weren't getting to those top tables. Another thing to look at is Space Marines. Despite their 45% win rate, they had a 25% XOX1 and a almost 6% representation. So for the players who did do good with Space Marines, did really good, and everyone else didn't do so great. So there was probably a handful of players carrying that XOX1 percentage and carrying the win percentage for them. Orcs had a decent week despite all the nerfs to Mordaka, 50% win rate, 25% XOX1, kind of similar to Space Marines, but just a little bit higher win rate. Leagues of Votan also had a really good week, and Deathwatch had a really good week at 58% with 20% XOX1. So another army you don't really see near the top all that often is Drukhari. So you can see there they had 3.3% representation. So lots of Drukhari players last week. That's the highest rep they've had in a while. Really good win rate, 52%, and a really good XOX1 at almost 29%. So players who did show up at Drukhari definitely had a lot of success, which was nice to see because they've been kind of struggling the last little while. And same as World Eaters, with all the releases and previews of the Codex coming, they actually had a pretty good week, 56% and 31%. So overall, they're doing pretty good. Now they're in line for a new Codex soon, so we'll have to see how that all shapes out. But just looking at the entire chart, it's not too bad. There's like 4 or 5 armies way at the top, 4 or 5 armies way at the bottom, and then everyone else is probably within a decent range of each other in the middle. So anywhere from like Blood Angels up to Drukhari, they're all fairly close to each other. So, overall, everything wasn't too bad. It was spread out fairly evenly with, a handful doing really well and a handful doing really poorly. So moving on, we have the tournament wins for each army last week. Blood Angels got their first win of the Dataslate last week, which is good to see. Orcs still got a win, although it wasn't with Mordaka. Tyranids pulled one out, Azure Militarum had 2, Deathwatch had 1, and Aeldari had 1, of course. Guard comes out on top this week with 2 wins, and everyone else just pulling in 1. And next up is the tournament wins for each subfaction. So this is just a way to take a look and see which subfactions are winning all the tournaments for the previous week. Kind of a surprise there. Mechanized Assault did get a win. I think it was their first of the data slate, and maybe their first in a long time. For Orcs, it was Warhorde. And of course, for Aeldari, it was Devoted of Unid. It always is. Overall, the Orcs got their win without Mordaka. I think it was the first week since it released that detachment didn't get a tournament win. So hopefully we'll start to see a few more wins getting spread out across more armies as the weeks go on. All right, so next up we have the win percentage by army for the current data slate. So this is the win percentage for the last 5 weeks of data. So at the top there, number 1, we have Deathwatch at 54%, Orcs at 53%, then Grey Knights at 52%, Imperial Knights and Chaos Demons also coming in at 52%. And down at the bottom, we have Imperial Agents at 37%, Drukhari 43%, Tau 43%, Admech 44%, and then we have 3 armies at 45%, Black Templars, Sisters, and Blood Angels. So for the first week, Deathwatch takes over the top spot from Orcs. The nerf to Mordaka dropped them down just a little bit, and Deathwatch had a really good week, so it just bumped them up ahead. We have 4 armies that are close to falling below that 45% win rate. So we have Black Templars, Sisters, Blood Angels, and Guard. Black Templars, they're just looking for their codex. I mean, hopefully that comes out soon. I don't know when it's exactly slated to be released, but if not, they really need some changes in the next balanced data slate because they are not in a great spot right now. Same as Sisters, the change did help, but it hasn't pushed them back up into the middle. You wouldn't want to see them probably around 47, 48%, so there's still some work to be done there. And then despite winning a bunch of tournaments, Guard is still kind of struggling in the win percentage, so it's hard to know if it's just a popularity with Guard. They're a very popular army. A lot of people play them. So that kind of drags their win percentage down, kind of like Space Marines and Orcs usually. They are winning some tournaments, so they might be in a little bit better spot than their win percentage shows. But Blood Angels just got their first win this week, and they definitely could use a little bit of help. They've been kind of floundering this whole data slate as well. Thousand Suns, 2 good weeks in a row, jumped up 6% in their overall win percentage the last 2 weeks. They were down to 44, 43% a couple weeks ago, and up to 50%. Only 4 armies below the 45% threshold, and AdMax rate of 44, so they're teetering on that mark. But overall, Tau and Drukhari 43. Drukhari did jump up quite a bit. They were down around 40, but they had a really good week, so it bumped them back up. Overall, everything's looking pretty balanced. You don't have anyone above 55%. You have some armies struggling, but you don't have anyone dominating, so a little bit more work to be done to bring everyone into the green. But I don't know. Agents is a tough one because there's such few players. It's really hard to grasp exactly how that army's doing because you only have 1, 2, or 3 players each week. So I don't know if they're ever going to be in the middle or we're going to get enough data to really make a good judgment on them. But we're getting close, and hopefully, the next Dataslate and maybe a couple new codex here and there, we'll be seeing those armies at the bottom sort of push back up into the middle, and everyone will be right in the green. And next up is the representation for the current data slate. So at the top there, we have Custodians at 7.6, Aeldari at 7.3, Space Marines at 7.2, Demons at 6.2, and Orcs at 6. Now at the bottom, you have Imperial Agents at 0.3, Templars 1.1, Deathwatch 1.3, Thousand Sons 1.3, and Sisters at 1.4. So it's a tight race at the top. Aeldari, Space Marines, and Custodians all over 7%. Space Marines, they're always popular. They're always going to be up that high. Aeldari just had a new codex dropped, and Custodians did just get that glow up for the bikes and their new detachment. So not surprising to see those 3 armies up there. Demons is kind of hanging around up there, 6.2%. They're actually above Orcs for as popular Orcs have been. There's been a ton of Demon players. Like I said before, hopefully these numbers will show Games Workshop that they need to stick around as an army. They're really well loved and really played, so you're going to lose a lot of people, or you're going to really make a lot of people upset by taking them away. And then down at the bottom, we have the usual suspects. We have a bunch of people below 2% representation. Drukhari still needs a codex. Thousand Sons still need a codex, which is coming soon. Templars still need a codex. Base Wolves still need one as well. So hopefully when all those codexes drop, we can see a little more play go into them and we can balance this list a little bit. But to fix some of the stuff like AdMech and Sisters, you're going to need some sweeping changes in the next data slate to get their popularity back up again. The spread is still large. Again, it's always wildly imbalanced when it comes to representation. It's going to need some drastic changes to kind of fix that. And next up, we have the combined stats for the current data slate. So we have win percentage, XOX1 percentage, and representation. So Orcs still at top of the list. And then we have Demons, Grey Knights, Aeldari, Necrons, and Deathwatch all coming in a close second. And then down at the bottom, we have Agents, Sisters of Battle, AdMech, Drukhari, and Tau rounding out the bottom 5. Orcs are still riding on the success of the early data slate with a 30% XOX1. That'll start to creep down over the coming weeks once we get some more data in. In the second tier of armies, you have Demons, Grey Knights, Aeldari, Necron, and Deathwatch. They're all very close to each other, and they're kind of getting there in different ways. You have Demons, and you have Aeldari and Necrons all kind of going at 50% win rate, 20% XOX1, and then a 5 to 7% representation. And then you have Deathwatch and Grey Knights who just have a higher XOX1 at 23, 22, and a higher win percentage, but a lower representation. You can see where the armies kind of get to their combined stats. But overall, I would say those armies are all performing very good and obviously well above average across the board, and they're in a good spot. And then you have down at the bottom, you have Sisters at 45% with a 12% XOX1. And you have AdMech at 44 with a 14%. They're down at the bottom and they're kind of suffering. A lot of their suffering does come from their army representation and their XOX1 percentage. The average is 17, so they're well below on that. But then you have things like Blood Angels. They're quietly struggling quite a bit. 45% win rate. They have a 13% XOX1, so it's one of the lowest across the board, despite their very high representation. So if their rep was down near, say, Sisters or AdMech, they would be right at the bottom of the list. And Black Templars as well. They're performing okay, 17% XOX1, so they're kind of on average there, but their win percentage is 45%. That's just dragging them down. This is a little bit more balanced than the week-by-week one. So you have Orcs, obviously, who are just kind of running away with it right now due to a broken detachment early on. And then you have that next group of 5 armies kind of taking up second place. And then everyone else after that is fairly close together, except when you get right down to the bottom where you have Sisters, AdMech, and Agents. They're kind of on their own little level at the bottom. I mean, Agents is way down there, but they're kind of just outliers in all the stats anyways. But looking at the whole graph, you can see that most armies are within a decent range of each other, and a couple good weeks here and there could sort of balance everything out a little bit. So overall, the current balance is not too bad when you take everything into account. Next up, we have the Army Tournament wins. That's week by week. So this shows the total number of tournament wins for the data slate, and it breaks it down week per week. So each color represents a different week, and you can see where each army gets all their wins. So you can see Orcs still on top, 14 tournament wins, but you can see their wins are kind of slowing down a little bit. They had a ton in the first couple weeks, and only one last week. Aeldari's in second with 8. Then you have Demons, Asher Militarum, Tyranids, and Space Marines, all with 8, 7, 6, and 5. And then down at the bottom, we did get Blood Angels, got their first win, and we're still with 8 armies without a tournament win. So, like I mentioned, Thousand Suns, despite their really good week, they still couldn't pull out a win. They keep it up. They should get one soon. Tyranids is quietly winning a decent amount of tournaments. And same as Space Marines. Space Marines don't have a lot of flash that they did last Dataslate because of Oath of Moment. They're still pulling out tournament wins. And Tyranids are right there with them with 5. Guard F6, Demon F7. Aeldari, they're going to keep creeping up, I think. Just because of Devoted of You Need, they're going to keep pulling out wins every week for those skilled players who know how to play them. Okay, and moving on, we're going to do our first faction focus, Chaos Space Marines. So this is a tale of a pretty balanced army, actually. Both armies this week we're looking at are fairly well balanced. So you look at the win percentage week over week and the army rep week over week. Their army rep is above average, anywhere from 4 to 6%, but their win percentage is from 46 to 50%. That's right where you want to be. And you compare their stats versus the meta average. Their win percentage is 48 versus 49. Their army rep is 4.7 versus 3.7. XOX1 is 18 versus 14.5, and tournament wins is 3 versus 2.6. So they're very close among the averages, a little bit high on one, a little bit low on the other, but pretty balanced overall. And then you look down at their Subfaction player count. So Creations of Bile has 32% of the player base, Renegade Raiders 24%, and then Packbound Zealots has 19% of the player base. So it's a pretty good spread there. You don't usually see an army with 3 detachments around 20%. Usually it's 1 or 2 that are doing most of the work. So, there is a lot of play within this codex. So I think as overall, it was a fairly well-received codex and has stood up pretty good. And then the win percentages at the bottom there, Creations of Bile, 52%. Chaos Cult is the highest at 65%, but they only 3% of the players, so it's hard to really take too much into that because it's such a small sample size. You have Renegade Raiders at 49, and then it kind of dips down a little bit. You have Veterans Long War, Soulforge, and they're all down in the low 40s. So Creations of Bile and Renegade are definitely doing most of the work, but there is still a decent amount of play there over the Subfaction. Overall, I think Chaos Space Marines are in a pretty good spot. Most of their ranks are to 27. They're all right within the 10 to 20 range, which is just perfectly average. It's not an army you hear much about, and you don't hear many people complaining either on either side of it. So, I think that's a good thing. Next up is Space Wolves. So this is another army who falls kind of right in the middle, and they kind of go about it a little bit opposite of the Chaos Space Marines, but they get to the same place. So you look at the last few weeks of results there, their army rep is kind of a little bit lower than the average, anywhere from 1 to 2.5%, but their win percentage is anywhere from 46 to mid 50s. And then you take a look at their meta average, so their win percentage is actually like 1% above the average at 50% versus 49. Their army representation is a little bit below at 1.7 versus 3.7. XOX1 is 21 versus 18, and their tournament wins are 3 versus 2.6. So it kind of gets the same place as Chaos Space Marines. They just have a little higher XOX1 and a little bit lower army rep. And you look down the bottom, it's a little bit different than Chaos Space Marines. They only have really one detachment doing most of the work, Champions of Russ. Now that is because they don't have Codex. So once the Codex drops, we should see that spread out a little bit better. But right now, Champions of Russ is 66% of the players. And if you look at the win percentages, Champions of Russ has a 48% win rate. Stormlance has a 56, Gladius has a 56, and Iron Storm has a 40. So overall, their detachment that has most of the players is getting right where you want to be at a 48% win rate. So everything's looking pretty good. And your ranks at a 20, their players are in the lower half of the average, but then their win percentage and everything else is up near the top. Again, Space Wolves is one of those armies that you don't really hear a lot of complaining about on both sides, being too good or being really bad. And they have that new codex coming and all those new models coming. So I think everyone's pretty hyped up for that. So it'll be really cool to see when that drops and see how those attachments look and see how that pans out in the meta after they get a couple weeks of data under their belt. So that's it for the week, guys. If you liked the video, don't forget the like button. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe. So make sure you get all my latest videos and help support me. I'm closing in on 1,000 subscribers, and I honestly didn't think I would get here this quickly, but your guys' support and your guys' enthusiasm and engaging with the videos and comments really means a lot to me. I try to respond to every comment, and I read every comment, and I really appreciate all the support and all the insight you guys give me. I love hearing the stories about games you guys played or your experiences with an army. I'm not familiar with every single army from a playing standpoint, so it's really great to hear people explain where their army might be falling short or what needs to be fixed. It helps give me a better perspective, and I hope that this continues, and I'll keep making videos. And again, I just really appreciate your guys' support, and it really means a lot to me. Good luck in the tournaments coming up, and we'll see you next week.